Welcome to today's episode of the Flank Podcast.
The quickest win, I think, for a lot of people and the easiest one to grasp. It particularly fits a direct consumer product because you want a chatbot that's
just prove it out once at the smaller scope, and then it's like use that trusting relationship to prove it out to the person who has more oversight to all the other individual.
Can you introduce me to your VC? Maybe talk about how pleased you were with the work that Flank did,
I'm Angus.
I'm Mallory.
I'm Bryce.
I'm Trevor.
And we're Flank.
Well, so Flank sits between a software engineer and a non-engineer. And if you sell to a company, you sort of have to get people on both sides to be using it. And so it's been like much easier to get people using the tool to just eliminate one of those sides. So like one of the ways we can do that is that we can use the tool internally ourselves. So we don't have to, convince there to be a non-engineer. We just use it for, our deployment pipeline or whatever. And then the other way is that we can just play the role of software engineer and just do a little consulting for people. And we tried this maybe a year ago. We stopped doing it after a couple attempts because each project was taking, even for small little stuff, was taking like 2 or 3 weeks. And I don't know, it was like not great bang for the buck. But now like the product is just a little better. We've done more of these things, so we just have more repeatable stuff that we can go back to. And it just seems like it's a good way to like get the word out and show people some different use cases that can be used. So actually, Bryce, I think it might be interesting if you could just kind of go through just kind of a list of the different use cases, like so-and-so uses Flank to fill in the blank, and just try to keep it like super concise as an exercise too.
Yep. So we have this guy who's kind of just like this guy named Clay, who isn't like a super good SWE, is friends with a guy named Cameron who doesn't have any engineering skills. And Clay wrote Cameron a web scraper to download a bunch of PDFs. They had some problems when Clay was sharing like the Python script to Cameron's computer, and like Cameron was trying to like run it even though he didn't know how to like run code or anything. So we ended up taking that scraper, throwing it in Flank. So now Cameron uses Flank to just start up a web scraper and get back a pre-signed URL that just like downloads a zip file with like about 80 PDFs that he wants with the information he needs. Then we have these guys from this NIL company called Out to Win. They currently are going through an iteration phase where they are trying to establish a marketplace between a bunch of athletes and a bunch of brands. And they've been doing a lot of stuff manually in the past where they'll go and like contact an athlete, like get their Instagram stats, get a bunch of other random stuff kind of around how they work. And it was just a very manual process to like add up and like just add everything to the database itself. So now they are using Flank in a variety of ways, and I'm providing some engineering support while they hire some initial engineers to just ingest a ton of data into the database itself. And then there's also 2 Flank commands that help them like with the actual outreach to brands themselves. There's one where you like put in like, oh, this brand is looking for athletes in football. And like also you could say like football and like Alabama. So then it would find like all of the top like football players in Alabama, and it puts together like a little like PDF that like has like the top 10 athletes they may want to contact. They can just like shoot that out to a brand. And then like they kind of have that as like a 2-parter where it's like the one creates the PDF and then the second one is like they write like a message that they want to send in the email, and then they can kind of send that out to like all of the brands they want to reach out to in Alabama or anything. So they're just using it to get some more leverage around any other non-technical people. Then we also have a high schooler down in Texas who decided with his buddies they were going to build a geopolitical event tracker online. And it was one guy's technical, and then they have like about 5 people who are just like interested in geopolitical events and like that just read a lot about it. So they're like, okay, we're gonna have the one guy build the website and kind of make the place for all the information to live and for people to interact with. And then they've been using Flank as like the entry system to add a bunch of data to the database. And then the technical guy kind of figures out how to display it. But rather than needing to make a bunch of custom forms and stuff for them to like input and add the event context or like to update any of the events, they've just been doing all of that through Flank. So he just wrote a basic script, and then now they all have that shared on their computers. So they only have like one public facing site, and then they have a Flank that acts as like kind of their admin panel to like update any of the user and like general population facing site information behind the scenes. And those are just like a couple of examples that we've been doing the past couple of weeks, or that people have been using the past couple of weeks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, those sound like the kind of the key, at least Angus, when you've talked to me, like they sound like pretty prototypical clients, what you were kind of had in mind with when I think you started talking about Flank with me a couple of years ago. And a lot of this, I think, stems from our experience at BLA and wanting to keep your technical people, particularly if you've got a lean technical staff, and keeping them on the things that they truly have to be doing versus like automating a scraper or what have you. That's kind of in one-off ad hoc things. And those feel like the biggest things that are super valuable to your non-technical staff, but things that accumulate and pull time away from the technical staff from working on the core product, particularly things that like make non-technical users' life or employees or stakeholders their lives much easier and saves them a lot of time, but in the process might pull a lot of time away from engineers.
Yep.
At least those are kind of what it sounds like to me.
Exactly. And then this morning we were talking with a venture capital, or 2 people who run a small venture capital fund, and they keep track of a bunch of companies in their Airtable. And they kind of had some use cases where they could maybe scrape a bunch of data from like Techstars, YC, and some of the other classic like places where you can find a bunch of startups, and do some like data enrichment off of it. And then also eventually like they like I kind of forget. Oh, and then eventually they like also like when they're like talking to any of these people, they want some sort of like good search feature as well to like be able to like look through their Airtable or Notion. But like we kind of started talking about the different things and tools we could build within Flank that could help that workflow. And they mentioned like, oh, there's this Affinity CRM that is essentially like all of that built into one. And they're like, we just like, it doesn't make sense for us to do it because we're not really at that scale yet. But we kind of started putting it into terms of like, it seems like there's like vertical SaaS utilities that like once your company gets big enough, you're like, oh, okay, we can afford to spend $1 million a year on this product or something because we know we're gonna like get a usage out of all these like 100 edge case features. But then like there's a lot of like smaller and middle tier companies who need custom software components to get more leverage out of their employees. But yeah, like you said, they just don't have like the engineering power at the current stage to like be able to do that, and they also don't want to like spend the whatever buku bucks on a big contract. So like I don't know, I hadn't really like thought about those frames of like instead of making a super vertical like specialized SaaS, like kind of intersecting like the lower middle ground there. But I was wondering if that kind of made sense to you at all.
It does. I mean, the VC aspect is interesting because, or a VC shop firm or a PE firm, because these are firms with moving significant amounts of money around and have big decisions to make with, 7, 8 figures worth of money at any given time, potentially more. Typically do not have big technical teams, have a lot of really, really smart people working heavily in Excel a lot of time. And that feels like a potential avenue for you guys, just as I'm kind of just riffing and thinking about it, where there's a lot of really important decisions to be made. Time is of the essence in always in all of these, where Flame could come in and help them without them having to go and hire full time contractors or even full time staff, which is expensive, and perhaps they only need that person maybe 50% of the time or whatever, and they don't have enough work to really support a full technical staff. But things like that could make their lives easier, particularly in an industry that I know is pretty heavily dominated by Excel in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and we were talking, and they said like, yeah, like a typical like tech stack, or like, yeah, like tech stack people would use on like. There's apparently a big Twitter thread where everyone's like, oh yeah, we all just use like Notion and Airtable, or yeah, Excel in a lot of cases, and uh, potentially there could be like a software engineer like out there who, instead of it making sense for one VC to hire a full-time software engineer and them not having work to do for them, whatever 50% of the time, like potentially they could write a scraper once that could interact with a lot of these common startup websites, and then an Airtable, a Notion, and whatever like common databases are used by VCs, and then package that with Flank and kind of redistribute that a couple of times and like support 10 VCs at once and like act as like a part-time suite to a bunch of different people rather than only doing like 50% of the work needed at one firm.
I mean, yes, I'm trying to. I mean, have you guys ever thought of? I'm totally spitballing now, trying to leverage sort of at least my experience the last couple of years. What I've been doing is where you guys have your standard Flank subscription offering, but there's some sort of a premium version of that I and then it gives you the base version gives you Flank, and their internal developers need to write scripts or scrapers or whatever it might be that is going to be automated and managed and deployed via Flank. There's a premium version that gives you X number of hours a week of your time or one of your developers' time. That's a pseudo option, but you price it properly where cool, then they don't have to go find, maybe they don't have a technical staff at all, and you manage the whole thing because they don't have to train or show this new contractor they've brought in on how to use Flame. It's all you guys already know how to do it. It's a premium offering, and it's already a trusted relationship, and they don't have to go out and find contractors or find software developers. Maybe I'm saying something you guys have already discussed.
Yeah, that's
I
basically
think
the
we've done
idea.
that. We just haven't like advertised it as such. Like you
Okay.
wouldn't find that language on our site. But I think internally, like that's also sort of how we thought about it. Like that's what Bryce has been doing, and Angus has done it at different
Yeah.
points too.
Yeah, but I
yeah,
do
I think
like
there's something to like marketing it that way, as opposed to just being like, oh yeah, we would do that if you asked us to.
Yeah, I'm just thinking in terms of this is your premium, your gold tier, insert, some sort of marketing language that I know people always want to feel like they're getting the best product and kind of the most premium version of what you guys offer. This is kind of your white glove type of service.
Yeah, the way I would describe the set of tooling around the VC use case is they've got an Airtable where they track companies basically, and if they brought in a software engineer full time, I think what that person would do is write 20 different cloud functions that do a variety of different things. They're all small, right? It'd be like grab a row from Airtable, run it through Chat GPT, and then sort of enrich that row with some sort of information or something like that. And they've just got a bunch of little stuff like that you could put together. And like those 20 things would be very customized, but in a lot of ways are sort of generalized too. A lot of people are doing stuff like that. And I guess, I don't know, I guess the question here and what we're trying to figure out is like, what's the best way to market that? And like, just how should we generally go about like reaching out to people and looking for this type of stuff? And like, I know you've done some outbound on the consulting side, and it's like bigger clients, bigger scope of work. This would be like tiny scope of work, but yeah.
So yeah, but tiny scope of work is usually I mean, it's just an easier sell. The more money, the more difficult it is for us to sell. Um, and you can go after smaller clients with potentially smaller budgets as well. Um, I have, I mean, one thing for you guys, and I imagine the Austin community in particular has this, is some sort of a pitch meeting to a group of investors, and if you can somehow get on that as a service provider and a preferred vendor of whether it's a VC firm or a PE firm to companies they invest in, I know is a really good channel, because then you're essentially getting a not just one. You've got your client is the VC firm, but really they're just recommending you and promoting you to all their portfolio companies,
Yeah.
and say, here's Flank. We love Flank. If you can get one of them in your category, in your corner, you don't have one client, you've got potentially 20, 30, 40 clients, right? Because they're recommending you, and they've got their network of companies that they invest in. That's the ideal scenario, and is something that has worked well for us, is building those types of relationships, because it's not a one-to-one, it's one-to-many.
Would you be able to expand a little bit on how that like type of relationship forms and how you would like go about doing that? Because I think we've like heard something kind of similar to that in the past, or like thought about doing something like that. But I think just in terms of like where to start and like how to go about it, like what my plan would be would just be like, yeah, like talk to VCs and like like try and ask that. But that seems incredibly blunt. So I'm wondering just kind of what your experience is in like successfully navigating that.
I mean, the best way is if you have one client that's in one of their funds, is so you go to your client, I would think, can you introduce me to your VC? Maybe talk about how pleased you were with the work that Flank did, make that introduction, I would think would be the way to go. As opposed to going directly to VC, you're going straight from your client to make that
Yeah.
introduction, because your client has already seen it at work and would be like, oh my gosh, Flank saved me X number of hours a week and this much cost on develop. I could cut my developer costs in half, or whatever that might look like. Um, if you can get kind of that beta client in one of these VC funds, make a recommendation, um, feels like you want to go upstream that way, and
Yeah.
then go back downstream, where then the VC goes back to future invested firms that they've invested in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like just
Um,
prove it out once at the smaller scope, and then it's like use that trusting relationship to prove it out to the person who has more oversight to all the other individual like
yeah,
partners you want to try
that
and.
that to me seems like the way to go, and is something has worked relatively well for us. Um, is um, trying to use current clients. Of course, word of mouth is kind of always the best recommendation, but this is word of mouth to somebody that can be word of mouth to 30, perhaps 30 clients at once. Um, so it's leveraging just a really, really strong network. Um, yeah. So
Yeah,
that's one aspect that I know that we've talked about a lot internally and have really worked hard on. Um, because particularly if you guys have a small team, we have a small team as well. There's only so many. I mean, Angus, you have a young one at home. There's only so many 5 o'clock beers you can have with some. There's only so many 5 o'clock beers you can have with people, or happy hours and networking events and all those things. Like, our time is limited, so it's about trying to leverage those times to get in front of the people that can introduce you to as many people as possible.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, or actually no, just like phrasing that really quick to make sure I think it makes sense is like you're saying kind of like you would do a 5 o'clock beer kind of with your client and be like, hey, like, would you mind introducing me to the VC? And then essentially like another kind of networking event with the VC to then hopefully cause that trickle down effect to all of their clients.
Yeah, I mean, like the holy grail would be, and I say this not with peak confidence. Realize like I don't have all the answers, but this is really just my thoughts and things that have worked reasonably well for us. Is if you could get a presentation in front of their portfolio companies on like in him to you come in, you offer for free to do like a presentation on portfolio companies on we've done that, and here's who Tiber is. That's what we do. We're a consulting firm. We talk about things that have gone well. Maybe we teach them a little bit of something about data engineering or something along those lines. But for you guys, that might be a showcase of Flank, some of the pain points it solves. And that's a way to get in front of eyeballs with I think a really well curated audience.
Yeah, and then from there, does the typical next step kind of be like the other portfolio companies would reach out to you guys individually, or at the end of the presentation, you're like, if anyone has any questions, like feel free to reach out to us, or like let's set up some meetings here. Like, do you set them up during the presentation, or what's kind of the next steps to like actually trying to get some of the VC's portfolio companies like on board with you guys?
I think, I mean, a good next step is always to kind of sit and hope. Ideally, ideally the presentation speaks for itself, and you guys get some natural inflow from there.
Right.
Perhaps there's a follow up with some literature, links and what have you. But I would think that if you guys are selling it, that you should get some natural inflow as a result. I think that would be the goal.
Something else, I'm switching gears here a little bit. Something else we've talked about more recently, just with regards to the product, is having more spreadsheet interoperability. I'm kind of curious, like what you've seen, either at EY or at Tiber, just in terms of, especially when you come into this sort of transition period where people are bringing in like their first tech person or like their first tech team or something like that. Just kind of like, yeah, like what you've seen from the software engineer's point of view of someone who's coming into like spreadsheet world and trying to add like some little automations like here and there to just make very manual stuff more efficient.
I mean, I think a lot of my time when I was over at EY was trying to bring people out of spreadsheet world and into automated world where all they have to do is they wake up in the morning and they can go grab this file that's automatically downloaded for them, as opposed to copying and pasting this here and merging this here, and you've got a spider web of Excel spreadsheets open at one given time. I was in the government space when I was there, so I think the government space is potentially another avenue, which certainly comes with an uphill battle on the procurement side with them, and getting contracts sold is certainly difficult, and building those relationships is its own beast relative to the private industry. But there's a lot of kind of spreadsheet spiderweb, so to speak, I know in that world that to me like screams Flank purely from a technology standpoint. Screams Flank, at least in my experience when I was over EY. From a business standpoint, the government's procurement cycle is long and arduous. That might be is a blocker for a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you're doing on that spreadsheet data once you pull them into software engineering world. I almost think of it as like there's a wall between, software engineering world and Excel world, where you've got Excel on one side and then databases and SQL and stuff like that on the other. And there's maybe even a third wall that's sort of like between the SQL writers and people who are like writing Python, deploying code.
Yeah, I mean, I to be honest, I experienced there a lot of here's data's living in SQL. It's going to get updated every morning. Export it from SQL, copy and paste it into this spreadsheet that's got some formulas baked into it, so that spreadsheet can update. Save that spreadsheet. Copy the results into another sheet that's a roll-up table of some kind, like pandas work. I mean, truly the things that you guys would just do in traditional pandas.
Yeah.
And basically, I would, some of my first tasks were very simple, like automate this whole process for us. And it's SQL Alchemy, pandas, export downstream to wherever it needs to go. Really straightforward things that can be done with I know certainly can be done in Flank, and those are types of things that I was amazed were not automated, to be honest. That I think are the types of things that a lot of companies, certainly I saw in the government space, but I imagine a lot of companies too struggle with and spend a lot of time doing, and can be automated once forever. Particularly, and I imagine a lot of that might even happen in the startup space as well, in some of these VC firms where you want to keep your engineers focused on not doing reporting on user metrics and things along those lines, but instead you want to keep them focused on the core product. But you've got this reporting lapse where you don't have as much insight into your user growth, into your your CAC and all these other things that you care about, that are super important, but you want to keep your engineers focused on building out the next widget on the product, the things that actually get seen by the customers. I feel like there could also be a whole reporting world, and that's a lot of what I was doing for what I saw with the government. But I think the VC application of this would be those types of reporting things that I feel like, to me, scream Flank, so that you can keep your engineers focused on the core product, while also having your cake and eating it too. You get to also have all these beautiful reporting dashboards and things like that are also super important.
Yeah, we've got one person that uses it for just grabbing model performance. So they basically just have a Lambda that calculates a bunch of performance numbers, and they just like click run, get the table back. I wouldn't say it's a beautiful dashboard, but it's like a super quick one.
Yeah, which, depending on what you want to do with it, may or may not be important. If it's strictly internal versus, I think every executive I've worked with executives that do not mind if I provide them with a black and white Word doc or some simple Excel tables, and other people like really beautiful dashboards. I tend to meet people where they're at. But I think for something internal, people are maybe not quite as strict on it being, state of the art on the front end side of things.
Yeah. So going back to the consulting thing, like we're basically trying to pump out, say, like 2 case studies a week, where it's like, hey, we help someone like build a little tool that is either a button for a scraper or effectively a Google form around some little piece of code or a database, or a way to run a query. A lot of different angles, but like, yeah, I don't know if you were us and you were trying to just basically just crank out a lot of these things and get like a lot of like quick little projects built, I guess how would you run it?
Right, because you guys are wanting for quicker wins. Um, I'm thinking. I mean, definitely like particularly for have you, I mean, you did a little bit of stuff with Upwork at one point, right? Where you were looking for because those have a lot of quick projects on there. But what was your success with that or lack thereof? I'm curious.
Well, we didn't really invest that much time into it. We played around with it for maybe a week, but you've got to you basically got to commit to becoming an Upworker and build up your credibility and do a bunch of projects basically for
And
free
then
on
you
the
have to do
front
like
end.
a lot of like applications too, and like kind of like making sure you can even get a job. And yeah, I don't think got too invested into the Upwork process itself.
Have you used it at all?
No, I've never used it. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I know that another potential outreach, is I know Y Common. I mean, I know Y Combinator has a job board as well that they look for contractors. But again, I think a lot of these are bigger. So right, because these are the bigger, because you guys are in a niche where you guys are looking for small quick win lifts versus like my world are the 6 month, year, 2 year plus contracts that we come in, land, expand, and then in a couple years, we've built this your product for you, and then typically after a couple years we leave.
Yeah.
But you guys want these quick winners that can be done in maybe a week or two, right?
Yeah, I think we'd want projects that are like scoped out in terms of weeks as opposed to months
Yeah.
or even
If it was
years.
anything longer than that, and we've actually got some stuff right now that's longer term, but we're basically trying to get ourselves out of the loop as the engineer. Like start, set up Flank, do some engineering work up front, but then, as time goes on, like stop, sort of get someone else into that consulting slot.
Right. So like I mean, one potential option, I mean, is I mean, you could also do a partnership with like a consulting firm, like whether it's Tiber or an EY or whatever, is building a relationship with one of them. Because a lot of times we get inflow for quick projects,
Yeah.
but we want the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. So right, because those are the kind of projects that the big, that we would want, that I know a lot of the bigger firms would want. But we get people asking, "Hey, can you build this in 2, 3, 4 weeks?" And a lot of times we don't necessarily have the bandwidth to do that. If we're fully staffed or what have you, is another potential route for you guys. That could
Does
also
that
work.
type of work? Do you think that type of work fits into the Flank universe where it's fairly manual, there's a human in the loop type of thing, or are those people looking for oh, I want to set up like this automated system that does everything on its own?
No, I think a lot of those quicker ones tend to be like, I want a proof of concept of something, or
Yeah.
um, we struggle with this, and lack of visibility, and I'm doing this repeatedly. I do think a lot of those fall into the flank because usually when someone wants a fully automated system, it's really the bigger ask, and it's a potentially a bigger project for us. But a lot of times we'll get really quick hitters um, that we either we try to, particularly if they're current clients, we try to support, but a lot of times we'll get reach out, and we just don't have the bandwidth to add it. Um, And that's another potential route for you guys, is to be down funnel of an already existing business and leverage that relationship.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. That's sort of how I think both the NIL company and this VC firm, I think, fit into that bucket where they're both just they're both just basically running on Airtable, and it's like, hey, we want to build out a bunch of automation, but we also don't want to scope something out that takes a year to build. It's like we'd rather just automate this little piece with 30 lines of code, then automate this little piece with 30 lines of code, and kind of like gradually cobble together this system. Um, and it's not. You were talking about like building a scraper, and it's not something that's going to like run on a schedule. It's just going to run whenever they go in and like click it. But like that's fine for now.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, most people aren't bothered by clicking a button. At least in my experience, is that if all they have to do
Yeah,
is go in and click a button when they want something, assuming it's not a 2 hour long process, assuming this is a sub 5 minute run, maybe we'll call it. Like, I don't think most people have a deep desire to have something be running on a schedule. They really want it more as an on demand feature. Um, at least is what I've gathered, um, particularly for a lot of these processes. Um, I think, in the big one that I keep coming back to is kind of the reporting is, how was our last week on user growth? How was our last week on cash in the door? How much, XYZ Monday morning, I hit a button and I get 4 different reports, that I can download straight from Flank and pull them up. Those are the types of things that I often find that people punt on because they don't want to pull engineering talent into, because they're
and are
not as.
those? Yeah, is that typically just someone writing like a SQL query, or is it just putting together some Excel? Is it like a little code plus a little Excel? Um,
Yeah, I
a
think
mixture.
code to Excel, or code, you know, some mixture of SQL and pandas and Excel. Um, some subset of those three, probably, I think, is what I see a lot of. Eventually the goal is that's like a lot of people, like big organizations, want those to be fully, our big organizations that we work with will want that to be a fully automated dashboard that C-suite execs can log into and see at any point. But at like a smaller organization, it's really, they just want to know on-demand numbers, like, hey, did we grow? What was our user base grow last week, or what have you?
I was just gonna ask you like what type of stuff you're working on now.
Um, God, I'm a bit all over the place these days. Um, I've got clients in a few different kind of streams of work. So I'm doing a bit of predictive modeling work. I'm also doing kind of some infrastructure work. So, one of my clients is pretty, they've, in the biospace, and has a really, really impressive AI software, but needs help kind of streamlining and automation. So I do a lot of automation work.
Hmm.
We kind of do soup to nuts. I mean, anything in the data space. So we'll hit data engineering, we'll hit automation, we'll hit predictive analytics, machine learning. I've started diving into, for one of my clients in particular, started building a chatbot for them. So those are some things that we've been dabbling into recently. That's kind of the newest thing for us is building on chatbots and leveraging LLMs and the OpenAI Azure partnership, and all the really cool things that can be done there are things that we've started doing as well. I would say that's probably like the newest, most exciting thing. Um,
With OpenAI, are you mostly doing chatbot stuff, or is there any sort of like, I don't know, data processing or summary extraction type of stuff that you're doing?
Or making a new model?
a bit of both. I think um, a bit of both. I think chatbots like the quickest win, I think, for a lot of people and the easiest one to grasp, particularly if it's a direct to consumer product, because you want a chatbot that's, you know, intelligent, has information at its fingertips, which is a much better process than either clicking through prompts or what have you. Um, and I think that like the clicking through prompts is probably frustrating for a lot of people, and I think that that's one that a lot of people see use in.
For the
Um,
for the chatbots, do you guys use like LangChain, or what does like the typical like implementation and project details typically entail?
I've started dabbling with LangChain and a few of the other um, sort of implementation, Llama Index, LangChain, um, and then you can leverage, OpenAI and any different subset of their models, and a bunch of different techniques to kind of get what you want out of the models. Um, so there, you can kind of use really any subset of those suite of tools. Um, Typically, all of the above is where I end up with some kind of. I usually end up with all of the above in order to get what I want. It's really easy to have these types of LMs go awry. Hallucination is super real. I found in my initial exploration with them. That's the biggest problem that I always have when I'm building one is, particularly if you give it access to the internet, it starts making things up. So building in guardrails, I would say, is the biggest chunk of my time, and not making sure it gets the right answer, but making sure that you know when it has a wrong answer. Um, is I would say one of the biggest struggles and pieces of development that I end up doing when I'm building these is try to identify wrong answers.
Yeah.
How do you do internet access programmatically? Like I know through the ChatGPT interface they've got the plugin, but then what does that look like if you're doing it in code?
So I believe Bing has their own API. I know Google has their own API with keys that you can get to then start searching the internet. I mean, I think Bing has the most fluid integration with OpenAI because of the Microsoft partnership. Um, so
Yeah.
they make that like really, really easy um, with some simple API calls. And you can get search results and you can get articles and you can actually get um, a bot to start extracting information from those. Um, I have found in my experience that giving it that much information is a fast track to having it hallucinate. Um, so I think properly curating that and properly adding guardrails is exceptionally important, and one of the things that I've spent a good bit doing so far.
To like stop it from hallucinating, have you been relying on like vector databases at all, or like what have you been doing to kind of counteract that?
A little bit. I think I've done a little bit of that. Adding prompt engineering is exceptionally helpful. You'd be surprised at what some simple prompt engineering that you and I can do with just pure English will help these chatbots. Asking it a question versus asking it a question and telling it to only like make sure you say I don't know if you're not sure. Like simple things like that, you'd be surprised how helpful they are. That's like the easiest,
Yeah.
lowest hanging fruit on prompt engineering is quite simply just saying, if you're not 100% sure, say, I don't know. But there's an art to that. It's definitely unlike a lot of other things that we do as engineers. There's a lot of art to it, and there's a lot of guessing and checking and seeing what works, as opposed to, hey, I need to merge these tables and build this sort of summary table and then drop this into this new database table and automate this process, which are fairly black and white. Like, you just need to build this thing. Where this is a bit more artful than I think a lot of things that I've certainly done in my career. Um, and I imagine what a lot of developers experienced.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. I remember when I was just using and also I still use this tip a lot, but I came across an article that said just add, do you have any clarifying questions at the end of your GPT prompts? And I found that really helpful, because then like the next thing will be 5 to 10 questions about the task I gave it, and then I provide those and provide more detail. So then whatever the GPT response is a lot more thoughtful and meaningful and like correct towards my actual result and like what I want to happen, instead of getting back a completely wrong result and then needing to be like, oh, we'll actually go back and do this thing instead. It's kind of nice, kind of taking a little bit more time in that planning step. But say I don't know if you're not sure is like such a good type of like quick tip that causes such a huge improvement in performance.
Yeah, that's like the quickest tip that I could possibly give that I've experienced, which seems so silly, but will actually reduce hallucinations. Um, so because if you just ask a question, it will do everything in its power to provide an answer, whether or not it's like completely confirmed and the answer it's found. But again, and I think part of the art form of it is to do with how new a lot of it is, at least into the broader public, and how much that, for instance, database construction, while there is some art to it, has been around for a long, long time, and there are some fairly clear, I think, best practices. I think that's probably less true for LLMs, given that they're, in the last year or two coming into the global or into kind of public view.
I guess with the type of hodgepodge solutions, or like where you said like all of the above before, that it's not just really like LangChain or was that Lum Index? What was that?
Llama Index is a
Oh,
pretty popular. Llama Index is pretty
yeah.
popular. Usually that's paired with LangChain in a lot of instances.
When stuff ends up being all of the above, is it because each tool is helpful for stopping a specific type of issue that you run into when constructing the chatbots? You're like, oh, I know like this type of LangChain interface is really useful for this, and then I know like Bing is better for this, so I'm going to use Bing here. Like, how does that construction come about where you end up using a lot of all of the above solutions, as opposed to being like, I'm going to use everything in LangChain, or I'm going to do everything with just OpenAI base?
Perhaps that's more stemming from my own and the clients I work with, that we call ourselves custom house builders. So everything we build, we like to do custom. I think if I were to build something that's more of an out of the box product, it might make sense to build it with one package in particular, one technology. But when my clients ask for something, they want it to be specifically customized to them with the XYZ very specific parameters, which usually one or two of the parameters are always going to contradict the others in terms of what packages and what types of solutions I want to build, which is fine. So I end up almost always taking the pieces from each different piece of technology that might work for that specific solution.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, but if I were to try to build something that were more of a general out of the box tool, I'd probably feel more wedded to one type of one type of package or what have you.
Mm-hmm. But your goal here at the end of the day is to build your client the best custom chatbot possible. So you're just going to use like every tool in your toolkit to make it as close to what they want as possible.
Exactly. I'm always going to default to more tools, assuming it doesn't add so much computing and storage complexity that it becomes too difficult to maintain. That's always the trade-off with adding more tools, is just an extra level of complexity and sometimes cost, depending on if they're free tools or not. But as with most things, there's a cost benefit analysis to be done. But assuming they're not too difficult to maintain and too cost prohibitive, I'll use more tools.
Yep. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know. That was about all I had on kind of the chatbot front. I don't know. Angus, do you have anything else on that front? Or anyone?
I don't think so. Do you want to, well, just as like a logistical thing, Harrison, is there anything you want to like plug, or you want to do like an outro or anything?
Sure. I guess I didn't totally I'm the lead data scientist for Tiber Solutions. So if anyone wants to drop a note, wants to chat on all things data science, data engineering, or also reach out if you ever need anything built. Maybe that's a longer term project than anything that Angus would do. Anything short term, I want you to reach out to these guys, but maybe something a bit bigger, and you can reach out our way.
And what's the type of stuff that y'all do? I know there's a lot of stuff across the board, but maybe just a couple examples.
Yeah, so data warehousing is, like, I would say, a lot of what we do. So I always say you've got a bunch of data written on the back of napkins that you've been collecting for 15 years, and maybe you've got a stack of napkins. We'll put those into a lean, efficient, fast data warehouse that can be accessed by stakeholders. Downstream from there, a lot of times we'll build predictive models. And downstream from there, a lot of times we'll build custom dashboards that can be shown to stakeholders. That might be the C-suite, that might be the clients. In recent years, we've started kind of building out proof of concept products for younger companies and startups as well.
Nice. That was a good explanation.
Thank you.
Very concise, and definitely like you feel the story there.
That's been the goal. I've been working on my kind of the nomenclature, my elevator pitch. I guess that's the right term, right?
Thanks for listening to the Flank podcast. If you'd like to follow us, check out our site at flank.cloud and follow us on Twitter at flankatx. Bye.